Well, hi there. This is our second of 3 videos on the market model. And so in this one, I'm going to try to supply what you demand. So just like with the prior video about demand, we're going to distinguish between quantity supplied, which is abbreviated QS, and supply. And quantity supplied is simply the amount that producers are willing and able to sell at a specific price, right? So for this one, it's just a very specific amount. It's like, okay, if the price is $8, we are willing and able to produce, say, 4 units. Oh man, autofocus, folks. Whoa, 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 hang on, autofocus. There we go. Now, supply is the relationship. Boy, this is still bubbling. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to get a little anchor for that bad boy. Relationship between all of the prices, all prices at which the good would sell for, right? And their respective quantities supplied, right? So it's like the quantities supplied. So again, we would say maybe there's like a data table that we could think about. If the price was, let's say, 0, then quantity supplied would be 0. People ain't going to produce any. But if we raise the price to 1, maybe people produce 1. If the price were 2, maybe we'd produce 2. Price were 3, we'd produce 3. At any given price, you have a specific amount that people are willing and able to produce, right? If the price is 2, people are willing and able to produce 2. The relationship between them and all of these number pairs, so like it's really described by the table, is what we call supply. Supply can also be visually or graphically illustrated the same way that demand is. We have price and quantity, but in this one, we're going to have an upward sloping line. That's what our supply curve is going to look like. And we would say that as price rises, therefore quantity supplied rises. And that's really what this graph is telling us, is that we were to go from like here to here, moving up the curve, well, quantity supplied is increasing. And we could say as price decreases, therefore quantity supplied decreases. So that's the law of supply. Now, just like with our prior lecture, we'd say that, we have an increase is going to be to the right and a decrease is always going to be to the left. So you could have things like, an increase in supply or a decrease in supply, but they're not going to happen as a result of price. Remember, price doesn't shift the curve. Only thing that price is going to do is move us to a different point on the same function that we already had. If we were changing supply, it would be like a whole new set of quantities supplied. So this might be like S curve 1, but if I had like S curve 2 listed up here, these numbers would be larger, right? So because S curve 2, S2 is a bigger value. So this might be like 2 and 4 and 6 and all that stuff, right? That first one might still be 0, but it's saying that like if the price was 1, now we're producing 2. If the price was 2, now we're producing 4. That would be an increase in supply. So let's talk about the 5 things that actually shift supply. They're very similar actually to the ones that shift demand, but it's a slightly different acronym just so you don't get mixed up. NITY, if you come up with a better one, I don't know. That one's kind of nitty gritty, but it's not a Y. Number of producers. Obviously, if there's more producers, there's going to be more supply. It's very much the same as the market size and the demand. Input costs. This is by far and away the most common one. So put a star next to it. You got to know that one. It's really important. Inputs are resources. They're the factors of production. So if the costs of the things that you need to produce are going up, then it's going to be more expensive to produce, and it's going to lead you to produce less because it's more expensive. So we'd say if costs are going up, supply is going to fall. Another way to think about that is actually that what this supply curve really represents is the cost of production. In some senses, it's like saying, well, what's the lowest price that you're willing to produce 5 units at? Well, what's the cost of that 5th unit? Maybe the price of that 5th unit was 4. Well, you're not going to sell that 5th unit for less than its cost. You may have heard some people saying in like retailing and business, I'm selling this to you at cost. I'm not making any money. What that would be saying is like, that's the lowest price they're willing to accept. That's their opportunity cost of actually doing it. And so we would say that if our costs are actually increasing, thinking about that's a decrease in supply. That would be like saying, well, now what's it going to take to produce 5 units? It might take $8 to get you to produce that. So I know that may seem like it's an increase in supply because it's vertically shifting it up. But really what it represents is that if you were to say that I still need to produce 5 units, now you're going to tell your customers, hey, you got to pay me twice as much, right? Because I just can't do it anymore. Or if you were keeping your price the same and you had a decrease like that, you would not be able to produce nearly as many units. In fact, based on what this graph looks like, if the price were still 4, you wouldn't be willing to sell any at all. So we would say that if we have higher input costs, there's actually less supply. It's a decrease in supply. Now, let me give you some examples about the most common ones. The most common ones are the wages of the workers, right? So that's by far and away the most common one. But there are other things. There's things like oil prices or gas prices, because oil is actually kind of a transportation cost, right? To get your product to market or what have you. So these things are inputs, even if we don't always think about them as being part of the actual product, the product itself. It costs money to get it from point A to point B, and most of the time that's done on oil. Wages of workers, you got to pay those workers. So if you're paying your workers more, it's more costly to produce, and that's going to decrease supply. Guaranteed there's going to be a bunch of folks who are going to go, wages of workers, that's going to change the demand. No. The last thing I'm going to say about this is if you have workers and they're getting paid more, those people are not necessarily buying your product, right? Those are not the same, right? The consumers are not the same as the workers in the company. So if the workers in the company are costing the company more, there's less supply. If the overall consumers have more income, then there's going to be more demand. And so you have to distinguish between those two pools of people because they're not necessarily the same, right? Taxes and subsidies. Now, these are another kind of related to the idea of input costs, but we break them out because they're often given as a separate style of problem. Taxes are just really when the government takes money from you when you do something. And we're only going to really affect supply if it's what we call a per unit tax. We're going to come back later in this class to talk about different types of taxes. But for right now, suffice it to say that if I said the government, and I'm the government, every time you produced a widget, you have to pay the government $1. That's just really adding $1 to your costs, right? So if I said you have a higher tax, it's going to decrease supply. So higher taxes will decrease supply. Now, the other part of this, taxes and subsidies, the subsidies part, students are often just like, whoosh, I have no idea what that is. Subsidies is just the same as a tax, but it's when the government gives you money to do something. They're really cool if you can convince the government to do it for you. Per unit are, again, the only ones that are going to have an effect. So this would be the case of like every time you produced a widget, the government was just like, that's so cool. Here's $1. And you're like, cool, I'm going to make another widget. And they're like, here's another $1. And they're like, okay, I'm going to make a third widget. And the government's like, okay, here's another $1. So every time you make a unit, you get $1. All that's really doing is reducing your cost of production by $1 per unit. So that actually increases our supply. Again, if you're having trouble thinking about why that would be, come back to this graph. Think about like, well, if let's say we were at this point, maybe that corresponds to say $7 on this supply curve. And let's say it corresponds to 0.7. So we would buy 7 units if the price was 7. And then the government gives us $1, or sorry, we would produce 7 units if the price was 7 because of the supply curve. If the government gives us $1 every time we make a unit, then it's going to cause us to have lower costs, and it's going to shift that curve kind of vertically down, actually. And it'll cause us to buy more units or produce more units as a result. Last two are much more easy to wrap your head around than input costs and taxes and subsidies. Technology. Technology, if it improves the productivity of your pre-existing resources, that just means that you can produce more with the same amount of stuff. So this is another way of saying you'd get more supply. So productivity is just like the amount of output per input is actually a way to think about that. And so if my output per input is rising, then I'm getting more stuff out of the same amount of inputs. And that means we're able to supply more stuff. Expectations about future prices. This is also a shifter of demand, but thinking about who's doing the expecting, that's going to know whether it's demand or supply. In this case, if the producers expect the prices to change, it's going to change supply. And for our example, if they expect the prices to rise soon, they're actually going to cut back on production today. And I know that may seem a little counterintuitive, but think about it this way. Let's say you're running a big store and you've got a warehouse and you've got a little retail shop. And that retail shop, right, you could stock it with lots and lots of stuff from your warehouse. You could put it all on the shelves, or you could maybe take a few things off the shelves and hold them back in the warehouse. Now, if you think people are just going to they're going to swarm your store and prices are going to rise really high soon, are you going to put everything on the shelves today? or are you going to wait a week until those prices actually do rise? Well, that's what we're going to do. In fact, you're going to take those things out of the system today, hold them back until the prices do rise, in which case you're actually going to then fulfill. So we would say that the supply will fall today if the producers expect the prices to rise soon. Conversely, if we expect them to fall, then what will I do today? I'm going to sell as much as I can, right? Because if I think that prices are going to be lower in 2 weeks from now, I'm going to put those units out the door as fast as I possibly can. So we have 5 shifters of supply. Number of producers, input costs is by far the most important. Wages is the one that trips people up. Taxes and subsidies, where we learned about those 2 different words. Technology and expectations also as shifters. Hopefully this helped you. I'll see you next time.